Hello, dear listeners. Before we get to the episode, we want to take a moment to address the June 24th Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision stripped away the legal right to have a safe and legal abortion. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all Americans. This decision could also lead to the loss of many other rights. To learn more about what you can do to help, listen to your neighbors who are hurting and scared with an ear for grace and understanding. We encourage you to speak up, to take care, to love your neighbor, and to spread the word.
Thanks for podding with me, Aaron. I'm glad we got that whole episode recorded, and now we can just, we're all done, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, you just started recording!
Rhyme or free, it doesn't matter to me. It's my bad poetry. Good day, and welcome to My Bad Poetry, a podcast where we take a deep dive into my dabbling with poetry between 2004 and 2008, when I was in high school. Each week, we typically hear a selection read aloud for what may be the first time. But this week, as we have wrapped up Season 2, we're taking a moment to answer some questions asked of us, the hosts.
Some hot burning questions from all three of our listeners.
Exactly, Dave. So let's get to these questions and answers.
You're not gonna ask for my poem?
Oh, did you write one? You were 30 minutes late, Dave. Were you writing a poem in that time?
My computer takes a couple minutes to boot up, so I had time to write a genius poem.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
I feel like for this episode, this makes sense. I'm going back to my roots. This is a haiku.
Yes.
Late have I arrived. Aaron has waited forlorn. I'm such a good friend.
I like it. Okay, so we're doing this special Q&A or AMA, however you want to think AUA, because it's Ask Us Anything. I don't know. But I thought to at least continue with some of the themes of this show. This show originated out of the Wolf Journal. Oh, okay, so I have two questions I can ask my previous self. What do I want to be when I grow up? And what would I change with the world? In this blue pen phase, which seems to lie between 2000, January of 2000 and March of 2004. So take your guess. When in that time I was writing in blue pen. I'm going to say 2001.
Anytime between middle school and high school.
Yep. Big difference here, but what did I want to be when I grew up? I love space. I will be a scientist when I grow up.
Ah.
Yep. And then what would I change in the world? If I could change one thing in the world, I would change it so I was strong.
Emotionally, physically, mentally, what do you think?
I was thinking muscle man. I don't know. Even my former self critiqued that. I went back with a pen sometime later, and I wrote, "Man, that wouldn't do much." Well, Dave, let's dig into some of these questions sent to us from the fan of the show.
All one of them.
Yeah, we do have some great questions sent in, and so
yes.
I'm
Thank
really,
you for sending in questions. Those who did.
Yeah, it was really fun to read and to compile this list. So I think an easy one that we can start out with is: are either of you dabbling with poetry currently outside of the podcast? Dave, you want to take that first?
Ooh, I'm reading a lot more poetry than I used to, which is a fair thing to say because I used to read zero poetry. So any amount of poetry is now reading a lot more. But I'm seeking out poetry now. I think I'm starting to understand a little bit better what I enjoy in poetry. You know, I think it can help me learn a little bit more about myself and the world, seeing different perspectives. And I think I'm being more poetic in the way that I talk. When I have a chance to plan out things that I'm saying, unlike this rambly, babbly sentence, I'm being a little more poetic with the way that I'm talking.
Sure. Yeah. Outside of the podcast, I have found myself, similar to you, engaging in poetry a lot more, reading and seeking out collections of poetry, and that started from just researching for the end poem of this podcast. But now it's like I'm actually reading poems on my own time that will never see the light of day on this podcast. But it, like you said, it has helped me understand myself and far more the world around me. And then I have actually dipped my toe into writing a few poems since the podcast has started, and I would blame the podcast for that. But I think it's just fun to play with words.
Yeah. Well, and I should say I did get Kelly's book, the I was going to say Everyday Preacher. I don't think that's it. But the book of poetry prompts that I've been messing around with. I wouldn't say I'm writing poetry based on it, but I'm writing expressively about her prompts, and I think that's kind of been a really fun thing to goof around with.
That's cool. Yeah, I have that book too on my shelf. I haven't worked with it yet, but that might be kind of a fun experiment as well. Yeah. Well, shall we move on to another question? Dave, do you want to ask it? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I really like this first question that we have.
Okay.
I'd like to know what intersections you see between your day jobs and your affection for poetry. Like, do you see your interest in poetry as being related to all your spiritual work?
Yeah, I really love this question. So, do you want me to take a crack at it first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. I think it's really interesting. I've mentioned before how I'm a manuscript preacher. And so I tend to write for the spoken word. I try to write in ways that it's sometimes described as sticky, little sentences or patterns of speech that can stick with people who are hearing it, so that the words matter. Because I truly believe that what we're preaching is grace and hope and love. And I want those who come to the place of worship that I serve to experience that. So when I look at poetry and I see that craft of words, and I'm just in awe of what some people can do and the things that they can express in just a turn of a phrase. And so I think that's one way that my day job influences or intersects with my affection for poetry. And then the other thing, there are books of poems in the Bible. There are multiple books. I mean, the Bible is a library with multiple genres. And so, like, you have Psalms and Job and Proverbs and Song of Songs. And studying that in seminary and realizing that you can read it as poetic instead of prose just really opened the door for me. So in some ways, studying more poetry now has actually influenced how I read parts of scripture, which is really cool to see that conversation flow back the other way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that works for me as well. Studying poetry in seminary and just thinking, before that, really, I had read poetry because I enjoyed Shakespeare and I enjoyed Edgar Allan Poe. And then I read it because I had to read it for school. And that was it. But then reading Hebrew poetry really changed how I understood that. And then I took some classes on Greek poetry to try and understand poetic language in Greek better. And I think that opened me up to realize that, no, poetry isn't just limericks and rhyming lines and all of this very basic, like, elementary school stuff. So that made me learn a little bit more. And yeah, I think that's been a good learning area for me. And I would say I always thought that I couldn't be poetic. And this is going to be a weird one. I don't know how to say this very well, because my pastors were always very boring preachers. And I say that in a very loving way. But like, sure. My pastors were always very, like, exegetical. They were just like looking at the text and trying to explain context and stuff.
Yeah.
But then you hear all these other pastors who are very poetic in how they speak. Like Bishop Michael Curry, the presiding bishop of the Episcopalians. Oh my gosh. that guy can preach. And when he preaches, he uses these call and response things. He uses this very beautiful poetic language. I just never thought I could do anything like that. And honestly, part of that came out of my fear of cultural appropriation, thinking
Sure.
I can't use that style because that's not a white style. That's a style reserved for people of color. And I don't know how to make sense of that. I think I have to kind of deconstruct my own ideas around faith and racism a lot more to better understand where I'm coming from on that perspective.
Yeah.
But I have really noticed more of those pastors who can preach like that, and I'm trying to incorporate more of that into my preaching because I find it so beautiful and so moving and so powerful. And so now I've started listening to like Moth Radio Hour.
Yeah.
Because again, those are storytellers, but man, if that is not poetry, I don't know what is. Like the way that they speak is so evocative and so emotional and so visceral that I hope that I can incorporate more poetry into my spiritual understanding, because you're not going to be able to explain the spiritual in academic terms or in philosophical terms. It's only in emotional and metaphorical terms that I can really understand the spiritual.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer.
Because I'm better than you, I get it.
Well, obviously, but yeah, it's. I think poetry does a really good job of kind of breaking down barriers, and helping convey emotions, and like you said, kind of reach some spiritual aspects that just academic pursuits aren't meant for.
Right. Yeah.
Huh. Well, that's a
You're
good
welcome.
question. Yeah. Okay, so
your turn.
Yeah, next question. Ooh, I think this is a good kind of follow-up to that one. This is a question that says, did you expect to have such serious conversations when you started the show?
I think I need to take this one first.
Yes.
Because I think you had an idea of what this could be, and you were thinking like it could be a good discussion around how the world works and how we as men talk about things. And my original understanding of this endeavor was I get to talk to Aaron every week and make fun of him. It became more than that very quickly. I mean, to be honest, there's still a lot of that.
Yep.
Oh yeah. No, I think we came into this with an idea that we could goof around, we could make fun of some old poetry, but we could kind of get to the heart of some of the toxicness of our history and also our present.
Yeah.
We talk about how in high school both you and I were a specific type of weirdo, and now we have not gotten past all of those specific types of weirdness, and we need to keep learning and keep re-examining who we are, so that we can continue to hopefully improve ourselves and improve the world around us. I think there's some beauty in being able to have these conversations. I did not expect them from the start, but I really enjoyed having these conversations with you.
Yeah. So when I wrote the initial script to the intro, I texted it to Dave right away, and it included the line, "I am dragging my dear friend Dave." That was my pitch. That was my pitch to Dave on what this show could be. And I really do think I kind of dragged you along. But I think when we were discussing kind of long-term goals, I had in the back of my mind the type of serious conversations we could have. And that was because I was privy to the poems that we were going to read. It may be read aloud for the first time, but I was skimming them to make sure we actually had stuff we could work with.
Right.
And I think one of the major things that I wanted to get out of this, or to ideally portray, is just a healthier understanding of male friendships.
Sure.
and relationships in general. And the conversations have evolved, obviously, and we've covered more topics. I initially thought that this could potentially be a helpful aid to those currently in high school to hear two fuddy-duddies
Yeah.
reminisce and kind of take some of the emotional dead weight that people are feeling off the shoulders and say, you know what, this is actually kind of humorous in the long run. You'll get past it. Things tend to get better. I think I'm surprised at the audience that it has gained, if we can say that.
Well,
and I think it's because, I mean, I just heard the average age of podcast listeners is 36. So I don't think I knew the demographics at first.
I was going to say, you know what high schoolers really love? Two middle-aged white guys talking about poetry.
Yeah, so I might have missed the mark at the beginning with kind of target demographics on who might appreciate this.
Yeah.
But that's been a surprise to me, but I think that wouldn't have changed the conversations at all. I think that's always been a goal. So
yeah. Well, and that's what's been fun about this is like there's not really an end goal for it.
No.
But it was just a chance to see where we were going with it. A chance to talk to each other, to learn a little bit, and it's morphed into something a little ridiculous where I got to talk to one of my like heroes of literature, and we're talking to these amazing poets who I have no idea why they're willing to talk to us because we're kind of just idiots, but they tell us these interesting things and they share with us, and man, I've been learning. This has been really fun.
Yeah. I think that leads us into our next question. Yeah. What have we learned?
We've learned that the recordings start at 12:30, but Dave will never be there before 1.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, I kind of build that into my schedule anyway. So.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. I just need to be more upfront with our guests about it, I guess.
This is one of those conversations where you tell me we're starting at 12:30 and you tell our guests we're starting at 1:30.
There we go.
Dave will definitely be there by 1:30, most likely, possibly.
One thing that I've learned is that I truly do love poetry. I mean, I think and it's just grown. So I kind of thought it was silly that my former self was writing so many of these truly awful poems, but then obviously the passion was there for something. So it's nice to kind of find new life, I guess. Yeah,
find new life. That works.
Yeah,
I think along those same lines, I've also learned that I love poetry, and also that I love bad poetry. I love bad poetry because it leads to fun discussions. Like, especially, again, with our incredible guests who share some of their bad poetry, and we get to dive into, well, why do you think this is bad? Because I see redeeming qualities in this, but where do you see it being bad? What were you trying to do with this? Where would you take it if you were to revisit it? Mm-hmm. It's fun to have those conversations. I think I would be horrible in like oh my gosh, my brain.
Right,
in like a workshop.
Yeah,
I would be absolutely garbage in a workshop. But this is my level of workshopping. Going, I don't know why I don't like it. Can we explore why I don't like it?
Give me an hour to just vamp, and then I can tell you one or two things that might help.
Right.
Yeah. The person who asked this might also be curious as to what we've learned about poetry. So I can start chapbooks being a thing, a word.
You're welcome.
Micro chaps, mini chaps,
thick boys.
Yeah. Gosh, that's been one major thing for me. And prose poem was a term that some of our guests have used, and I had to look it up because it's poetry that doesn't utilize kind of stanza breaks. So it's but it still is poetic writing. So that's a term I had never heard before, and so it was nice to learn that as well. Yeah.
I've mostly been learning that I don't know what poetry is, and I don't know what it's for. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing. To not know what poetry is for and to just read. There's something beautiful in that. Because it means so much to so many different people, and I like being able to just explore.
Yeah. The open-endedness.
Yeah.
Of just receiving something without previous expectation. Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah.
Which question do you want to tackle next?
I like most memorable moments.
Most memorable? Perfect. Yeah. Okay.
There is one answer and one answer alone, and it is thick boys.
Oh gosh. There has been a lot. I mean,
we've had a lot of weird ones, and I love it.
One of my favorites, and I think I posted this on Twitter a long time ago, was an exchange that we had that just felt so natural and so us and genuine. And it was about the Hebrew word for blessed and curse. And we went back and forth a little about like, you think people hearing your words are a blessing. And I even forget what, it was a fun exchange. And that moment when I went back and was editing, I was like, this is just exactly, I think why we are friends, but also just it captures the kind of the mood that I imagined for this show. And so that was a memorable moment in just editing and capturing that exchange. I still remember sitting nervously waiting for Kelly Russell Agadon's video to come on when she joined us on Zoom. And just being utterly terrified,
right?
that we had like jumped into the deep end and had no clue what we were doing.
How are we talking to someone like this? Like, she actually knows stuff, and she's gonna realize that we're entirely frauds.
The imposter syndrome was very real on that day. And she was so gracious and just 100% with us on this weird experiment. And that was a big moment for me.
Well, I think that's one of the things, I mean, kind of taking it back to what have we learned, that I've learned about the poetry world, which I should have known. Poets are weird, and I love them.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's, like, poets are just, like, people who are so utterly creative and so willing to jump into whatever and to goof around on a silly concept like our podcast. And I love it.
Yeah.
It's just being able to find people who understand us without knowing us or understanding us.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's like the rapport that we have found. We have fallen into the best kind of people.
Right.
And maybe we've just found a pocket within the poetry world, but I love it. And it's been really fun to just have these creative souls just join us and shoot the breeze. Like, and so, every guest has been memorable. There has not been a single guest where I was like, oh, that was awkward, or oh, I don't know if we should put this out, or every guest has been phenomenal. And that's been really fun.
I do have to say, one of my favorite parts of recording a podcast has been some of our guests haven't known that we're pastors.
Yes.
And so then the moment of like, you've been talking to two pastors for the last 20 minutes, and they go, what have I been saying? Are they going to be upset with me? And we're just like, no, this was all wonderful, and thank you for being willing to talk to us.
Yeah. It's like the mental calculation, like how many F-bombs have I dropped? It is kind of funny when that occurs, and that has occurred multiple times.
Right?
Oh, it's been fun. Yeah. So I love this question too. What has your family, friends, or coworkers thought of this project?
I can start with family. My family didn't know that I had this project for a fairly long time because I don't post on Facebook, and so they don't look at my Facebook page. But my family thinks it's kind of fun.
Oh, good.
Because they know who I am, so they know how weird I am. So it just kind of plays into their current understanding of me.
There you go.
My friends, again, they also think it's very strange, but they have fun with it. Coworkers and actually some parishioners have been listening for a while, which is a little strange. I had one Sunday after church, I had one member of my congregation walk out of the worship service and say, "Hey, Dave, I was listening to your episode about obsession." And like in my brain, I had no idea what she was talking about. And I just went, "What? My episode? I didn't even preach today. What are you? Oh, you listen to the podcast? Are you okay? Do we need to seek help for you?"
Yeah, I had one encounter at my previous congregation where our Lenten themes incorporated poetry, and after one of the services, the parishioner came up and was like, "Did you come up with this idea when you were working on the podcast?" And I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" Yeah, so it's interesting. I think Abby, my wife Abby, was kind of just supportive at the start that I was talking with friends outside of her. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and just we needed our energy to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think she was just happy about me having a project. She still consistently listens, and I can hear her laugh sometimes when I catch her listening to it. So it's always funny when she says, "It was a good episode this time." It's always surprising to her. But
I mean, it's surprising to me too.
Yeah, it is. Every time I put it out, I was like, I don't know. My family seems to really like it. I've always joked that Sonia was our first like diehard fan, and I sent her exclusive once. I think my friends are extremely indifferent. Actually, I say that I have two friends who have been longtime adopters and like to kind of debrief with me after they hear an episode. They'll have some questions and stuff, which is fun. But outside of that, I think most of the other people I've bugged have not listened to an episode, and that's fine. But yeah, for the most part, it's been really affirming.
Yeah. Well, and going into this, I assumed this was going to be my ticket out of working for the rest of my life, that we were just going to be like the next Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
So it's been a little disappointing.
I'm sure after you sold all of your investments and retirement fund, that your wife might not be as supportive of the project, and might have some resentment around the investments and the time that you have put into this.
I think she just likes it because it's time where I'm not talking to her, time where I'm not bothering her, and she can hear herself think.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
Yeah. Okay, so this leads to our last question. What are the plans for the show after running out of Aaron's old poems?
We will shut down and never go on the internet again. I think that's...
Yeah, I think that's the contract we signed.
Yeah, our Faustian bargain.
Finish Aaron's poems, then you're done with the internet.
Fair.
That sounds great. About right. Yeah, it's been a good run. But honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
We have at least one more season of my old poems, so we can do 3 seasons and call it. But there seems to be some energy around people who want to share their truly awful poems with us, and we love it. So if it evolves to something where we're working with guests and hearing their stuff and bringing back old friends, I think we'll see what happens. But I'm open to however this project evolves. It's been a fun journey so far, and it's only been a year. So
it's all been super weird and just wonderful. So if it stayed where it started, we would have been done by now, and it would have just been a fun little thing we goofed around with. But it's changed, and I've enjoyed going with the flow of it.
Exactly. And so we'll just kind of trust our gut, and it'll have been a fun ride. Well, Dave, this is the end of our Q&A. So hopefully we've answered some of your questions, and
we've made some cues.
No. Hopefully we haven't left you with more questions than when we started.
Yeah.
So how I thought we'd end this, since we are a poetry podcast now, or have always been, I don't know. Technically, yeah. So we will end this week with the words of a true poet. Dave, at this current moment, and understanding that things change and that we can have multiple favorites, but at this current moment, what is your favorite poem?
So there have been a lot of poems that I've been learning about and I keep exploring more. But one that I always come back to is Sonnet 17 by Pablo Neruda. A beautiful poem. So this is, again, Sonnet 17 by Pablo Neruda. I do not love you as if you were salt rose or topaz, or the arrow of carnations that fire shoots off. I love you as certain dark things are to be loved, in secret, between the shadow and the soul. I love you as the plant that never blooms, but carries in itself the light of hidden flowers. Thanks to your love, a certain solid fragrance, risen from the earth, lives darkly in my body. I love you without knowing how, or when, or from where. I love you straightforwardly, without complexities or pride. So I love you because I know no other way than this. Where I does not exist, nor you. So close that your hand on my chest is my hand. So close that your eyes close as I fall asleep. And that is a translation. I don't have who wrote that translation. Because Pablo Neruda wrote in Spanish.
Right. Yeah. We've talked about this poem before, and I think to hear it in its entirety, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
what are you sharing?
Yeah, what am I sharing?
Come on.
My favorite poem is
There Once Was a Man from Nantucket.
No.
Puff the Magic Dragon lived by the sea.
I do love Puff the Magic Dragon. And that has been one of my daughter's go-to songs in the last week. So
nice.
I have heard it a lot this week. Anyway, but this actually goes all the way back to the first or second question that was asked about the connection between spirituality. And one thing that I forgot to talk about, and I think both of us share, is our history in choral music.
Oh, yeah.
And
Ken Jennings?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's Isaiah, but
okay, I thought you were going The Lord is the Everlasting God.
No, that is my hands down favorite choral arrangement. And it is poetic language from the prophet, second Isaiah. But I think that's another in to my appreciation for modern poetry and exposure to poetry has been through the choral, the sacred choral tradition. A lot of poems have been set by some amazing arrangers and composers, and so that's another exposure that I have to poetry that I really find extremely meaningful in my personal faith. And so a poem that struck me in college that has continued to stick with me and influence so much of my life, I guess, is E.E. Cummings' I Thank You, God. And I encountered this first through Eric Whitacre's setting of it. So this is E.E. Cummings' I Thank You, God. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and the blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and the love and wings, and of gay, great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake and the eyes of my eyes are opened.
Beautiful.
This has been an experimental episode. Some may call it a filler episode, as I try and get to that 24 episode mark, because I'm that kind of weird. Why I made that a goal, I do not know.
Neurotic?
Yeah, well, dutiful to rules, and Who made that rule? I did. I don't know.
You're dutiful to rules that you made up for yourself about yourself.
That sounds very Ayn Randian. I don't like that.
No, I think that's perfect.
Well, before we do any more soul searching, this has been My Bad Poetry.
Now go write some of your own bad poetry.
Whoop whoop.
Whoop.
Oh, baby crying.
Oh. Yeah.
No, I have not read. No.
Oh. I did Anthem.
Rhyme free doesn't matter.